less than 25 miles off the coast. Now, supposedly, the plan will go to Kim Jong-un for his sign-off in just days. Meantime, the war of words continues. North Korea's media calling the fire and fury threat from President Trump, quote, a load of nonsense from a leader they call, quote, bereft of reason. Now, they rule out dialogue, saying that only absolute force can work. We have live coverage throughout the region. Let's begin, though, with Will Ripley, who has been to Pyongyang more than a dozen times. He joins us from Beijing. Of course, China, a key player in all of this. Will, your assessment of this response from North Korea?
Well, as we expected, Poppy, Pyongyang is really upping the ante in this war of words with Washington, and specifically with President Trump. Instead of backing down, this statement dials up the rhetoric even further, personally insulting President Trump, saying that he lacks knowledge of the situation on the Korean Peninsula, that he can't be reasoned with, that North Korea has to use absolute force in dealing with him. But also, what really makes this different from North Korean threats. North Korea often threatens to attack U.S. territories. They've threatened to attack Guam. They've threatened many times to attack and annihilate the United States and Washington. But to lay out such a detailed technical plan, that's what makes this so unusual, saying they'll use the Hwasong-12 rockets, an intermediate-range rocket that can travel at least 2,300 miles, putting Guam, which is only 2,100 miles from the Korean Peninsula, potentially within striking range, saying that they'll fly these rockets up over Japan and put them down in the waters less than 20 miles from Guam. The fact that they're being so detailed here indicates that either, one, they're bluffing, and this is all written down in an attempt to kind of add bluster, but that they don't have any plan of following through, or they technically feel that they have the capability to do this, and they feel so confident about it that they will put the plan on paper as almost a warning to Washington not to test North Korea's resolve. I will say this, Poppy. I've talked with North Korean officials as recently as a month and a half ago. All of these weapons in their arsenal that they are developing are designed as a deterrent. They say that they do not want to use them, although they also say they're not afraid to use them. This entire investment in this huge arsenal is to keep Kim Jong-un in power, and the North Koreans know they are outgunned if they actually do start some sort of a war with the United States, and the end result would not be good for them.
Will Ripley, thank you very much for that. Now to Guam. Our Ivan Watson is there. And Ivan, this is not the first time that Guam and the people of Guam have dealt with a threat.
No, shortly after Kim Jong-un took office after the death of his father, the previous leader of North Korea, he made threats against Guam, which is the westernmost piece of American territory, also home to several major U.S. military installations. And after those threats came, the U.S. military deployed the THAAD missile defense system here, which more recently has also been deployed in South Korea to help protect that region, that country, from ongoing threats coming from Pyongyang. So the governor of Guam, who I spoke with at length today, he insists that the threat level has not been increased in response to the statement that Will described and showed to you there. He also pointed out that there's no panic on the streets or the beaches of this island. Take a listen.
There's no panic in Guam. I'm sure you've talked to people who live in Seoul or even Tokyo. I think the concerns are even more weighty over there, which is closer to the action, and particularly Seoul, where enemy artillery is within range of the inhabitants of Seoul.
There's concern here. People are concerned. They're instructing their kids what to do in the event that the emergency sirens go off. But I saw a lot of people swimming and snorkeling in the beach in the bay behind me today as well. Poppy?
Ivan Watson, thank you for that perspective. It's important to be on the ground and talking to them there. We appreciate it live in Guam. South Korea, for its part, is saying it is still open and ready for dialogue, diplomacy with its neighbor. Our Anna Koren joins me now from Seoul with that. I mean, this has been the strategy of President Moon since he was elected, and clearly the South Koreans are still hanging on to that.
Yeah, it's quite incredible, isn't it, Poppy? I mean, South Koreans have been living with this threat for decades, and ever since President Moon Jae-in came into power earlier this year, he has opened the doors for dialogue with North Korea. Obviously, the North Koreans haven't taken him up on that offer, but he has persisted. Interestingly, however, there has been some sort of political shift in the climate here in South Korea ever since North Korea successfully tested that ICBM at the end of last month. That's when President Moon, he reversed his decision to actually suspend the THAAD missile defence system. And then there's also been a call by political conservative politicians, I should say, in this country for the reintroduction of America's tactical nuclear weapons, something that was withdrawn from South Korea in the 1990s. So I definitely think it's fair to say that while South Koreans are very calm and cool and measured when it comes to threats from North Korea, as far as the government is concerned, as far as this president is concerned, whilst they're open to dialogue, they are also very aware that they need to beef up their own defences because of that perceived threat from the North. Poppy?
Right, and as Will Ripley reported last hour, the U.S., South Korea will have those joint military exercises together as well this month, the show of force to the north. Thank you very, very much from the reporting from Seoul. Joining us now, Kelsey Davenport, Director for Nonproliferation Policy at the Arms Control Association, an important voice today, of course, and Colonel Peter Mansour, former aide to General David Petraeus. Nice to have you both here. And Colonel, you said something interesting that I'd love for you to explain to our viewers. You say it's essential for President Trump, you believe, to put the military option on the table front and center like he is right now for diplomacy to work. Explain.
Well, that's exactly right. For 2 decades now, diplomacy has done nothing to halt the North Korean nuclear program or its missile development. You know, Henry Kissinger once said that diplomacy without the threat of force is like an orchestra without instruments. And in this case, unless Kim Jong-un believes that the military lever of power is actually on the table and that we would use it, he will just continue to do what he's doing in developing ICBMs and miniaturizing his nuclear warheads. So I actually think that in this case, the threat of force can be a valuable addition to our diplomacy, but it's got to be used very, very delicately.
Kelsey, you would disagree. I mean, you make the argument that diplomacy, that talks have worked. But if that's the case, why are we where we are now? Why has North Korea accelerated its development so much?
Well, I think that what the White House really needs to be doing now is making a more concerted effort to send a direct signal to North Korea that it's willing to engage in talks. President Trump's threats, the fiery rhetoric, are just inviting North Korea to make additional threats of its own and increasing the chance of miscalculation. Now, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is talking about negotiations, and that's good. But when you have the Secretary of State making one message and you have threats coming from the president, it's difficult for North Korea to know how to respond, and that increases the chance of miscalculation.
But what about the lessons from history? I mean, it didn't work in the Clinton administration, the Bush administration, and the Obama administration because the program just carried on despite some brief pauses and accelerated to where we are today, Kelsey. I think that's the core of my question is, who is to say that it will work when history has shown otherwise?
Well, I disagree slightly about how diplomacy with North Korea has worked in the past. The United States negotiated bilaterally with North Korea in the 90s, and while that agreement did ultimately fall apart, it did halt North Korea's production of plutonium for nuclear weapons for a number of years. And multilateral talks with North Korea during the Bush administration, yielded similar results, a halt in the program. So I think that demonstrates that we can engage with North Korea in talks if there's a concerted effort, and that's what the Trump administration needs to be signaling now. I don't think the Obama administration made a concerted effort to try and engage with North Korea. They relied too much on sanctions to push North Korea to the table. And that's not a strategy, and that's not going to work now.
Colonel, do you agree with Kelsey? Diplomacy is still the way to have success here?
Well, I would just point out that the agreed framework that President Clinton negotiated fell apart. The talks that President Bush entered into, they fell apart when North Korea detonated a nuclear device in 2006. Look, the only way to end North Korea or freeze North Korea's nuclear program and missile program is to put enough pressure on them with all levers of power so that they come to the table in good faith. And that's what they have not done in the past two decades.
What about the rhetoric that's been used, Kelsey? I mean, the president using words akin to Truman after the first atomic bomb was dropped, fire and fury, unlike the world has ever seen before. We've learned since he made those remarks they were contemporaneous. These were sort of not passed by his team, and they were off the cuff. Your take?
Well, it still sends a dangerous signal to North Korea that the United States is willing to escalate the rhetoric as North Korea escalates rhetoric of its own. You know, since Trump made those comments, North Korea has made a more specific threat than its usual level of threat toward Guam. Now, it's critical that the United States not respond by increasing the level of rhetoric further and look for options to de-escalate the situation. I mean, I certainly agree that there needs to be pressure on North Korea to get them to talk, but talks and pressure need to go hand in hand. And right now there's a diplomacy deficit when it comes to outreach to North Korea.
Kelsey, thank you very much. Colonel, thank you as well. We appreciate the perspective from both of you. So President Trump has drawn his own red line. You heard it very clearly. The question now becomes this morning, what happens if North Korea crosses it? We're talking to a Republican member of the Foreign Affairs Committee next. Also, he's the man President